Uni udai uron tesoriero unong Australia. Udai uloyo berujushnaru yaki documentary film. Padahakani ke video kadai ke way na kita ki bauron ularingdur bat lum jingtip bat jingwat benia ha kebayadai bat ka Kamphylla jong ka Ïukharist Bakhuid ha Argentina. Haus nem si hajar khandai spa khandai pusan. Uway briew ulathiet yu stashu jong Ïukharist. Hendrei hakatahi kasngi balathiet yu ulasdang banjau umat batjau snam daladihi. Uron tesorero unong yasaj an ulayo i yakata ka jingja dalaki jonggi khmat. Ulayo aru banring dur yakani ka klipmat hakapor bajau umat. Ulay kandu iki babun ki sakhi ki balayu i yakani ka jingja. Ki x-ray ki panishay bo amshim ladon ke ru hapo ustashu hendrei ulong ubadap teli. Lapalat arphusnam uron tesorero ulalit kandu iki start sayan hakaling ke perthai banle yaka jingpet banya bat ka DNA test yaka snam balapenmi lo stashu. Kilalap bakasnam kadai na ubri ubadang im. Hendrei kata kasnam kamdon yaka jinglong kabakasnam jong kibriu kadai bandon kabakiong hakaktian pareng ka human genetic code. O Professor Fiore unong hikai badai ki an dawai haro. Ulanang pensisa susu yaka dakabatas ki arteli ki nuksa lani ki sampel ki bau uron tesorero ulali ayahu. U Fiore ulayat ho bakasnam kadai kabami na ubriu. Hendrei ka bapala kalong bakamdon yaka jinglong briew human genetic code. Yakani ka jinglam ka bapher don jingbatay da kumnu ru. Haba pimong ka bynta bapimong kasdang bansaw bat terkhong suki. Yakatu ka bynta ka basaw bat terkhong hakaktian pareng latip kum ka blood scabs. Menta ka test balatip kum ka pathology test sikini ki blood scabs kalawan ra su iki jingkandit. Hapo kini ki scabs kadan ka epithelial tissue. Kakenjas ni do ya kebalapan mi tang da ubri ubadang im. Kum si banta jong ka jingpan koit pat ban pensange ya ka jingmi snam haba kamet ubri kalaman saw.
I could just start with a close up. And what you see here, this is a low power, and this is all dried, dissolved blood cells. And then here are ghost-like outlines of cells. You can see the nuclei barely in here. So this is epidermis. This is skin. This is skin. Skin and blood on the surface. Skin, which is degenerated also, and blood on the surface.
Habala bishar bania susu uhistopathologist ulalam balakhle lang bat kasnam ki don gisni do ki barit ki bami na kajing mansaw ki bapila banyu i hangni hatrai jong screen.
It's stratified epithelium. It's probably squamous, but it's actually quite.
Ulaong bakaday gasni do kabajam. Kabala banday na kasni do jong kasuntur ni nakibanta ba syapo jong kasuntur. Lani kala banwan na kasni do kabakham jeliu kum kador khmat. Hakabala kho no e kabenta jong kasni do balatip kum ka keratin. Ulaong barabor hi om julap yiki tissue sni do hakasnam. Bat kajing pau syai pat bagasni do kalakhle lang bat kasnam. Kapan i bakaladon kajing mansaw kabasir khay. Kumba pinsyam la daw briw la sya tangon de kakenjatiar ki baluñ bat ki bala pat ban penmi ya kasnam.
That this material would not come from an inanimate object.
Ka science kamla ban batay kumnu uni ustasyu jong Ïukharist ulasim hi daladi ye ki jinglong jong ubriw ubaim. Ubasya sitom bat ubalaman saw. Dayhang ni ha bonus series balaja ka bapalatam. Upo Francis ubolong ubishop rangba jong kata kanong ba ha kata kapor ukwa ba on toket yaka bat uron tesoriro ulayo yakani ka kam bekerpang ban pelong yakata ka jing toket kalapan pauru khambun ki ban yaka ba ulakmi ilenti bat ka balatip pat ba kum ka kamba Ïukharist chung ka Buenos Aires kalaja hakani ka jing mani kajingethu khana kalong sapang uniu padar upadri Alessandro Pezas ubaloong bahaga khat pratrik ubanai Agos chung kasnem 1000 khandai spa khandai phundriyo lalap yuwei komunyan hus balai no hakiyeng mani bo dipet labu yu hus saku bat nangta lakhang tala yu hak tabernacle hadin prasngi habal pli ka tabernacle layu i ka ai ka bakum kasnam ka bami no hus hakatayo ka bubut ka jingkala kala nang khamsaw bat khamhe haubanai Oktober jong snam 1000 khandai spa khandai phukhandai la shim yi sampul no hus bat nangta lasdang ya ka jing toket hausnam 1000 saw ron tesoriro ulapan i ka sampul jong hus hau Dr. Frederick Zuckerbe shim layat hu yu Dr. Frederick shapang kata ka sampul bat nang nu la shim ya ka bat shisendon u Dr. Frederick shim la shim kanu ka jing ban ithu eka
heart tissue. There's a inflammatory infiltrate here. The heart tissue itself is degenerating. In other words, this is what happens sometimes after a heart attack. This is a person that had a heart attack, but it's not a immediate. In other words, the person had to have lived a period of time after this. Now, there's other things that can cause this type of a item that resembles a heart attack. In automobile accidents, where they get chest crushes and it causes damage to the heart. You get it from a person getting beat up across the chest. You get coronary injuries from that. You get coronary injuries from people who gave CPR incorrectly and a person comes out of it. That area may die off. The injury hit this area of the heart, right here. The heart is one area that I know. Yep. This is my business. I think it actually comes from about right in this area, right in here.
And what's the function of that part of the heart?
That's the left ventricle. That's a major area that pumps the blood to all parts of the body. Now, what's the history?
Okay. We're investigating the potential of this being a Eucharistic miracle. A communion host was found abandoned in a church in Argentina in 1996. Somebody picked it up, and instead of the priest consuming it, because it had been on the floor and was dirty, they placed it in water. It was put in the tabernacle. When it was taken out a few days later, it was a blood-like substance. Then when the blood-like substance appeared, they thought something is happening here, so they put it all into distilled water.
That is amazing. How long had it been in the water in all?
3 years.
That tissue was in water for 3 years?
Yes.
That's hard to believe, because the tissue in here shows good fixation. And it would be amazing. The big thing about it is, that's really so funny, here it's heart muscle. But those cells are not normally there. Those inflammatory cells are not normally there. They come in as a reaction to injury. The blood supply is compromised and so forth. That's what really amazes me, that if that was a piece of Eucharist, where did those cells come from? These cells have to come from other areas of the body in order to do that. You guys are kind of like detectives on this stuff, huh?
I think it's the world's biggest detective story.
Uh-huh.
Shisha kadai ka detective story ka bahe tam ha ka parthai. Komunong ya saj an uron tesuriro ulayatay bat phaliw jingmut bada Dr. Zukobe ban examine ye ke Buenos Aires sampel kabula ai hau don tangu nong thok khubor u Mike Willsi bada Ron Tesorero hi hakata ka kamra Ron Tesorero ularing doria Dr. Zukobe ubalai thu bakani ka dei ka sien baningkong ye ka jinglam ki baplatam jong u kidak ki bapenpau ye ka jingman saw kilong ka jingdon jong kita ki baki khot ki white blood cells ki badang im u forensic pathologist Dr. Robert Lawrence ulo comment shapang ka jingdon jong kita ki cell.
This material had been placed directly into water after it was taken off a body. I would expect these cells to be dissolved. So they were active, living white cells at the time they were collected.
Ka jingmi hi daladi na kasuda jong kito ki white blood cells ki badang im ni ki badang terikam kalong ka bapala. Ki cells kilong ki unit bukongsan jong ka jingim. Kilong ki sakhi jong ka jingim. Ka science kaya thu ingi baya ka ka bapiyo ihang ni omshim day satya balapun wandur na lasna na markaan jong kamariang kala bat kala penlong hi daladi yakitu ki cell ki baningkong haki pau hajar snem menswa. Kani kadi ka teori ka balapun syong nong rim haki jing mudur om haka jing shisha. Henry ki jing shisha haka jing ja ha bonus series pat ki yathu yangi ya ka bapher baklabak. Kani ka jing shandur ka balayu i hapo ka microscope kalong ka sakhi ka baskem. Bagi sel jong ubriyo bat ka jing im jong ubriyo kilami hi hangtu bat omday di ki pau hajar snem kum babatay ka science. Hangni ngiyo isya ya ki white blood cells ki bayim ki baw Dr. Zukobe ulabatay syapang jong ki. Bat nang ta hakaliang kamon i muscle tissue jong ukulong snam briew. Baro na ubriyo ubadang im. Lapalat shispa snem ki start science kilale i gijing persyang batwat benia kumnu ka jing im kalas dang pat hado menta kim pat la batai kilawat i kawai kanuksa la dadon em hakabagi sel jong ka jing im ilami na ki bamdon jing im Henry kim shim lalap satya ka jingja ha bonus series hakabakhadu ka bo biang yublay haka khana jong ka jingsneng ya ki jingthao. Kay kabalaja ha bonus series hakasnam siya jar khandai spa khandai phunriu nado kata kapur laja shakiwei patru ki jaka. Kalaja ha tiksla ha Mexico hausnam arajar ndriu. Uho sulami snam ha kapur basa me ko komunion. Lalap bakade ka snam briu bat ka tissue jong klong snam briu. Kumjuru hasuk kolka hapolan hausnem arajar pra ulingdo ukumpanhap yuhu sa kapur komunion habalabu haku lapaw ka kanja balang snam lalap bakati ka substance idei tissue klong snam briyo na ubriyo ubadang im ubalamat iga jingsya penmansaw bat kumjuru halek nika polan hausnem arajar khatlai ukomunion hus ulakaladur lalap beidei tissue klong snam briyo bawan na ubriyo balamat ye ke jingsya penmansaw ke bajurba hakini ke jingja baro lalap yo hus baulakala sya tissue klong snam bamiru na klong snam balamat ye ke jingmansaw ke bajur Kasnam na ustasyu kapani bakamdon niya kata ke human genetic code habale ya ka standard DNA testing. Yakani kaju ke jinglong ke bapala lalapru bakalong kumju badu komunion hus ha bonus series namar omsim lalap ya ke human genetic code hang niru. Kani ke genetic code ka donkam yulan her pateng na ukupa. Kumta balay omsim ladon kani ke code habro arteli kini kikis. Henry hausnam arhajar khandriyo habolok na Italy ka forensic laboratory kalale ya ka advanced DNA ka test ka bakham thamai kat kum kapur manta halor kini ki arteli ki case bantip ya ka lanher pateng na kalyang jong ka kami Kila penonkam da kabuites ka bathamay tam. Kila siyam ya ka jingya suriem ki bakado. Baka kies jong stasyu bat ka kies jong communion host baro arteli ki badon ya kaju ka kut ni ulan hiar pateng ubaday na kaju ka kami. Kiong ngilalyo ya ka result jong ka test ki bampat jujia ko hak history jong ka DNA forensic test. Bakini ki arteli ki kies ki don ka jingya day kaway bat kaway pat. Bat uron tesorio ulapan kut. Kumta habro arteli ki kies ngi kren syapang briew uba kerpang. Briew balamat igi jing mansaw na ka jing sya pensitom ka basirkhay. Briew ubamdon ye ke human genetic code. Henry ubadon ye ka tenrai kami. Kabala ban ithu. Lani kata ka mother's code. Lani ulan hiar pateng na kaliang jongkak kami.